Perception is one of our superpowers, and it has polarity as it can be constructive or destructive, and either one of those qualities can be good or bad. Our perception can be used to build a prison for ourselves and one another, and it can be used to dissolve these prisons and grant us our freedom. You're familiar with this exercise in perception. A pessimist says that this glass is half empty, while an optimist says that it's half full, and you're supposed to say which one best describes you. Are you the type to count your blessings and ignore what you lack, or are you the type to neglect what you have and focus on what you don't? And now a shift in perception. This whole thing is what you have been given. What are its qualities, and what can you do with them? If you would like to have a drink, you may because you have water. And if you would like to add more, you can because there's room for more. This water has value, and this empty space also has value. And looking at what can be done with this empty space, it suggests to us that there may exist more water outside of this present situation. And this understanding of not being limited to what we have at present has profound implications. It makes all the difference. In my lifetime, I've encountered a number of provocative ideas that had a major impact on my worldview. One such idea is that you should hope to be fortunate enough to one day encounter a true tyrant, one who subjugates, dominates, and oppresses you, who makes you small, denies you of your will, and makes you serve him or her or it or them, the tyrant. The blessing is that the tyrant will enable you to discover and master yourself by setting up conditions that will require you to learn of your strengths and your weaknesses, the strengths and weaknesses of your tyrant, and the resources available to each of you. With patience, careful study, and creativity, you can use this knowledge to overcome your tyrant and gain your freedom. The greater the tyrant, the sweeter the reward, as you will have to transform yourself into someone powerful enough to be free of that tyranny. And your freedom is the lesser reward. The greater reward is what you have become. Curiosity and a playful spirit will serve us best as we make our way through a series of video clips from a variety of sources. You will see that each of these clips will connect with and build upon the previous, and if you maintain a curious and playful spirit, I can promise you that these ideas and themes will begin to snowball in such a manner that your mind will light up and dazzle you with all sorts of valuable insights and revelations. There is a link to the original video for each clip posted in the description below in order of their appearance, and each is linked to the appropriate timestamp in the source video so you can explore the context at your leisure. So let's get started with an elegant summary of the tyrant of our times.
We have effectively entered a period in which we cannot trust our experts. And I think that what began as a desire to contribute and to do real work ended with an understanding that we've got 2 generations of institutional experts that are corrupted and that we cannot wake up from this crazy fever dream that we're all in because we can't figure out who we can still trust. The doctors are compromised, the professors are compromised, the journalists are compromised, the politicians are compromised. About the only thing that isn't badly compromised are people with an independent source of sustenance. Individuals in very small groups are about the only thing that is free of this disease of the embedded growth obligation. And so the paradox is that the individuals have to save the institutions that are trying to extinguish them, because the institutions don't want to hear this message. But in fact, if they don't make use of the tiny number of people functioning as individuals or in small organizations, all of this is going to collapse.
There's our tyrant, the corruption of our institutions and the loss of trust in our experts. This corruption has created a situation where our institutions no longer serve our well-being but their own. Even worse, our institutions are consuming us. What's interesting is that Eric has identified the solution to this problem as you. You and I as individuals in very small groups with an independent means of sustenance will have to save the very institutions that are trying to extinguish us. And we will save them rather than destroy them or let them collapse, because it is unacceptable to go back to giving birth outdoors in the dirt. It is equally unacceptable to give birth in a state-of-the-art hospital where your baby is welcomed into the world with a series of injections and you don't know for sure which are truly necessary and which ones have been added to the list simply for profit, or which of the truly necessary injections are using a new recipe because the patent on the old one has expired. Perhaps the old recipe was the most effective with the fewest risks of side effects, but your baby doesn't get to have that one anymore because it's not as profitable. We are in the information age now. You and I should not have to be in the dark about these things, and it's this prioritization of profits over everything else that is the embedded growth obligation that Eric is talking about. Now, the first look at any formidable opponent can be overwhelming as we identify their strengths and compare them with our weaknesses. So let's look a little more closely at an example concerning our medical institutions.
We never get to the root causes of the illness. It is not profitable for pharmaceutical companies to do that. Pharmaceutical companies fund the studies. They deliberately design a product so that it's taken as many times as possible. They will know that there's going to be an effect that you can measure. They will then play their statistical game with relative risk reduction and absolute risk reduction, which is a whole different topic, to wildly exaggerate the benefits. They will go out there with medical journals who frequently they are sponsoring. Same with academic doctors, same with medical societies. The mainstream media is on board, and then boom, you see your headline in the Daily Mail or the New York Times about drug XYZ, which does this. And that's how our system works. That's how it's worked for a long time. This is how those companies are making billions and billions of dollars. And people have completely neglected to think, why are we only trying to fix the symptoms and not getting to the root cause?
Do cures kill markets? We can see the incentives for our institutions who, being captured by the embedded growth obligation, are best served by offering us treatments instead of cures. Treatments where the more you consume, the better. Basically, a subscription-based model for medicine. This arrangement is feeding on us by trapping us in a condition of managed or farmed illness. What's also alarming is the deception used to pull this off. The manipulation of statistics, the biased funding of studies, buying off researchers, the control over review boards. Ethics and morality aside, this deception is a fatal error for all of us because we are building our civilization on falsehood, and what is not true, what is not real, cannot last. Consider the following comment on what is a good scientist.
I mean, what a good scientist does, if he comes up with a correlation, is try as hard as she or he possibly can to disprove it, to break it down, to get rid of it, to try and refute it. And if it withstands all those efforts at demolishing it and it's still standing up, then cautiously you say, we really might have something here.
Does that sound like the science being presented to us today in our media? Let's look now at our political and corporate institutions using a couple segments from a short documentary on what's been happening in East Palestine, Ohio, USA.
I think it brought attention to a lot of people, especially in like sleepy little East Palestine, that never really questioned a lot of things that like big things like that. Because I mean, it is a big thing. You think politics don't involve you until they directly involve you.
The Norfolk Southern disaster was big enough to shock people out of their political corners and raise questions about how business is done. How do you measure profits and stock prices against the value of people's lives, against clean air, clean water, and soil? Can politicians really take money from corporations and be expected to hold them accountable? And who is the government for, anyway?
And it just feels like we're screaming into the void. It really, really, truly does. I wish it wasn't up to us to have to do everything ourselves. Like, I mean, I just want to go back to like a normal life and do the stuff I want to do, like not just try to figure out how to like avoid this like chemical apocalypse right now.
We've been here for over a week. We've seen national figures and camera crews come and go, but what gets lost in so much of that coverage is that the people here still have a ton of unanswered questions. How safe is the air and water really? Who, if anyone, has the juice to square up with a $55 billion company that treats disasters as the cost of doing business? And will anyone step up to lead this time?
Do I have to wait until I have cancer or my kids are sick before you guys are going to do anything?
It's clear that our well-being is not the primary focus of our institutions today. The documentary asks, how do you measure stock prices against the value of people's lives, clean air, water, and soil? Can politicians really be expected to take money from corporations and be expected to hold them accountable? We've taken a very simple overview of some of the problems we're facing, and that's intentional because you're already well aware of the seemingly endless scroll of bad news that we're facing. So let's shift gears now and get into how we're going to outperform these tyrants. Remember to keep the curiosity dial turned all the way up as we add more material to our snowball. Here's another clip from Sunil and John.
Get doctors in there who really understand what health and well-being is, how we can't just think that drugs are the solution to everything, how we can't have close relationships with financial, well, companies which have financial bottom line as their goal. Real health and well-being starts first and foremost with very simple things like what you're eating, how much you're exercising, what your community relationships are, etc. This will take a complete overhaul, and I don't know whether I'll see it in my lifetime, but this is how it starts. And I believe if it starts in the United States, it will quickly filter through to other Western countries.
Yeah, I agree completely that there is hope, but perhaps the current systems are too much entrenched in the current system to be able to be reformed, and we need a bit of a root and branch reform. But the people that want to do this work are there. The resources on the planet are there. We have the potential as humanity to have the most spectacular healthcare system, so the vast majority of people can live a really healthy, long life.
I believe that John is correct in saying that the current systems are too entrenched to reform themselves, but reform is needed, so how will we get it? It's important for us to understand that our institutions have a momentum that may be too strong for us to redirect right now, and it's naive and unrealistic for us to expect our institutions to change on their own. The better strategy seems to be for us to weaken their momentum, and we do that by changing our individual behavior, redirecting our dollars and attention where we can. In a nutshell, it seems our institutions, government, academia, media, healthcare, etc., have grown and integrated in such a manner that we citizens are raised, organized, incentivized, and coerced into serving our institutions and those who control them, rather than our institutions serving our well-being. Remember what Eric said in the beginning, that individuals and small groups with an independent means of sustenance is about the only thing that can save our institutions. Let's combine that idea with some of what Sunil was just discussing, that health and well-being starts with very simple things such as what we are eating, exercise, and our communal bonds. This is the arena where we are going to make the changes that will remove power from our institutions, slowing and weakening them to the point to where they can be submitted and reformed. Let's play with the following example of someone who changed his diet, got healthier, and found a community online that he can serve and supports him in return.
I'm 76 years old. For the past 10 years or so, I have felt irrelevant in this world, which just keeps changing and moving so fast. And it was kind of depressing. I've been feeling that there's really not a place for me. The world has no use for me anymore. I'm just an old guy waiting, to cash in his chips. And that's a bad feeling. You're getting older. And to feel irrelevant. Now, my kids love me, and I have kids and grandkids, and they're great and all, but everybody needs a purpose and a reason to feel like that they're contributing. And I didn't have that, and I couldn't find it. I tried it with the drone stuff, but it wasn't there. It wasn't fulfilling. And I hope that I can make you understand that after 10 years of feeling like a failure, irrelevant, and useless, what you great people wrote in your comments to me, and the compliments and the praise, I don't even, there's no words. There's just no words to describe what it did to me. And what it did to me I think, has effectively changed my life. And that is a profound change. And for that, I needed to come on here, and I needed to thank each and every one of you that clicked that subscribe button, that clicked that like button, that wrote a comment to me, that complimented me, and made me feel somewhat useful again. And y'all gave me a new sense of purpose. And I only hope that going forward, I manage to live up to your expectations. So thank you again.
It's a fundamental truth that everyone needs to have a purpose, a mission, to know that their existence is meaningful and of value. We are going to bore into this truth and unleash a power that is literally beyond imagination, and this is not hyperbole. In a moment, I'm going to play a segment from a presentation about climate change, and it doesn't matter whether you believe climate change is a real threat or a global scam, because the true solutions are the same in either scenario. If it's true that climate change is real and will destroy civilization as we know it within the next decade, that is a massive existential threat, and overcoming it will require each of us becoming healthier physically, mentally, and emotionally. Each of us becoming more connected with one another and better organized within our communities. And we will all need to access the education and training necessary to help us adapt as continuous shifts in our climate wreaks havoc on our infrastructure, our supply chains, food resources, and so on. Because of these large-scale systemic shocks to major infrastructure, it's in our best interest to be less dependent on our institutions, as our institutions are going to struggle to handle emerging catastrophes hitting them on regional, national, and multinational levels. Let's not forget that our institutions will focus their resources on self-preservation first and foremost, and we won't be able to do much on the local and regional scales if we don't become more self-reliant, resilient, and networked within our local communities. Now, if it's true that climate change is a global scam perpetrated by a multi-generational and international network of ruling class elites who want to capture and rule the world, then that too is a massive existential threat, where we have less than a decade to get ourselves organized, trained, and engaged. My proposal to you is that we invest our time and energy in solutions that are so fundamental that they will remain effective regardless of which scenario turns out to be true. If climate change is real, our solutions will allow us to be healthy, educated, highly adaptable, and resourceful, so we have the best chance of piloting this climate chaos. And if it is a scam, our solutions will allow us to be healthy, educated, highly adaptable, and resourceful, so that the globalist cabal will not be able to play whack-a-mole fast enough to suppress us. And their efforts to do so would eliminate any veil of secrecy and public doubt that has shielded them from the wrath of the general public thus far. That said, here's the clip about climate change.
Geophysical Research Letters gets on board in 2010, and finally, in a paper by Michael Jennings at the University of Idaho, we see an admission in the referee journal literature that a suite, not just one, but a suite of amplifying feedback mechanisms or self-reinforcing feedback loops, or so-called positive feedbacks, such as massive methane leaks from the subsea Arctic Ocean, have engaged. So the self-reinforcing feedback loops are underway. These are feedback loops that feed upon themselves. So the faster they go, the faster they have the potential to go. A good example is ice on the Arctic Ocean, floating ice on the Arctic Ocean, which has been in decline since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and most notably within the last 34 years or so. And as the ice gets smaller, it reflects less radiation back up into space, and that open blue water absorbs more of that radiation. And the more it absorbs, the warmer the ocean gets, and so the faster the ice melts, and the faster the ice melts, the less albedo we have, the less reflectance we have going back into space. So it's this mechanism that feeds upon itself. The faster it goes, the faster it's able to go.
When we examine the structures of a problem, its solution can reveal itself, and we just received the blueprint for overcoming the tyrants of our time. The only way for our species to conquer a suite of amplifying feedback mechanisms, be they climate or institutional, is for us to behave similarly by constructing and setting off our own suite of self-reinforcing amplifying feedback mechanisms. And great news, this is already happening. It's just a matter of having enough of our population consciously engaged in this at a high enough level of proficiency for us to really take off and go exponential. Here's a cool idea for us to incorporate.
To force you, to suppress you physically so that I have the opportunity to compete against your natural physical abilities doesn't make us better.
Right.
It doesn't, all it does is pull back the benefits we could get from you.
Yes.
And then it forces me to try to maintain your natural skill sets. What would be much better is to pair us as a team.
Yeah.
Let you do what you're naturally good at. Let me do what I'm naturally good at. We're reducing the number of net vulnerabilities between the two of us.
Yes.
By contributing our individual strengths as a team, we reduce our net vulnerabilities. United we stand, divided we fall. Again, it is a fundamental truth that we all need to have a purpose, a mission, and to know that our existence is meaningful and valuable. By harnessing the power of this truth, we are going to witness and experience a reality that will overwhelm us with wonder, awe, and a sense of gratitude so glorious that our finest poets will simply put down their pens and weep. You have people in your life whom you love, and you see them suffering. How will it feel to see all of them in a state of recovery? How will it feel to find yourself in a world where you and everyone around you is getting better? How would it feel for you to know that you are playing a vital role in allowing all of this to happen? Listen to this.
The program that I was on was a new program, and the agency did not realize the capabilities that we brought to the table at first. So the requirements were, I think you had to have at least 6 years special operations to get in the door. And so that specific portion within the agency was, there was a ton of experience there. And they didn't realize what all we were capable of. It was, these guys can do a lot more than protection. They can do surveillance. They can do, we can pretty much do anything. It's a large, at this point, it's now a large special operations unit where you're drawn from Green Berets, Navy SEALs, SEAL Team 6, Delta, Green Berets, Air Force PJs, Marine Reconnaissance, Marine Raiders, which are special activities guys, and you combine all of that knowledge into one unit. That's what you get. And they started, so when you go out into the field and you have a good boss and they're like, oh man, I wish we had this capability. It's like, well, fuck, we can do that. What do you want to do? Well, we want to set up comms and be able to push out a surveillance position over here to watch this portion of the border. Yeah, no problem. Well, what do you want? We need to do this. Okay, well, and so all these new capabilities started getting brought to the table, and then that started spreading, and it became a lot more than just basic protection.
He said all these new capabilities started getting brought to the table, and then that started spreading and became a lot more. All that incredible talent Sean's describing came from combining a few men from several U.S. Special Forces teams. As Americans, and as humans in a global community, we have access to even more knowledge and talent than what was available in that dynamic unit. There is no finish line here. Once we set this off, we will all get to experience what it really means to have unlimited potential. So prepare yourself for the ride of your life. Here's a useful graphic that will help us get organized.
Although I think a lot of people think of permaculture as about food growing and gardening and that sort of thing, it turns out that everything that we apply, that we learn from the garden or learn from ecosystems, can be applied to almost everything else we do. So in permaculture, we're really talking about dealing with food and energy and water and shelter and waste, as well as what we call the invisible structures, things like security and spirit and culture and education and law and finance and all of those. And the idea is that we kind of, again, apply the zone system, is that we start personally trying to get all those things, or some of them, or one of them, or whatever, in alignment in ourselves, or we find a place to specialize in them. And then we move out to the local level and try and make sure that we're meeting our needs all around this flower successfully at the local level. And then we go and look at the more regional level as well. Another way to think of this, I mean, these are all the basic, you could add some more things to this list, but I think these are kind of the basic things we need to have a really functional culture. And I think that if I went around this room and have everyone put their initials at where they are working, are you working on regional waste issues? Are you working on local finance issues? Are you working on personal food issues, these sorts of things? I'll bet everybody in this room could probably stick their initials somewhere on here, and we'd have this thing all filled up and all taken care of.
We'll dive into that diagram in greater detail here in a minute, but there's a few more elements to mix in to first ratchet up the intensity. In the climate change narrative, I'm hearing things like World War III scale mobilization and civic engagement is needed to address it. And in the corrupt globalist narrative, I'm hearing similar language in that we are all being targeted by global scale psyops, and that fifth generation warfare is being waged against the general population, where the battlefield is in our minds, in our homes, in our communities, and the primary targets of interest are the values and beliefs that constitute our family bonds, social fabric, and cultures. So let's run the war scenario in our minds for a moment as we give the following our attention.
Rommel said, "The best form of welfare for the troops is first-class training, for this saves unnecessary casualties. First-class training means hard work and sacrifice." General Bruce Clark's adage, "The more we sweat on the training field, the less we bleed on the battlefield," is one I've followed ever since I was a teenager, and I'm convinced it keeps the casualty list short. I always felt like I need to do everything I can to have these guys ready. Everything I can to have these guys ready. And when I was in charge of training and I was sending platoons overseas, I felt the same way. This training is what they're relying on to keep them alive. And do you sit there and look back and say, why didn't I wait? Why didn't I bring more fire? Why didn't I go myself? Why didn't I go to the left? All those questions, yeah. You're going to have those questions, but those questions are quieter if you know that you did everything you can to prepare the guys for the situations that they're going into.
What do you suppose elite grade training in civics would look like? Seriously, let's assume global civilization will collapse within 5 to 10 years due to climate instability, or that all of humanity is about to be captured by totalitarians with AI. We have only a couple years to utilize all the talents and resources that we have available amongst ourselves to craft the most robust and effective training programs to give each other our last best shot at overcoming these imminent existential threats. What would be taught in such training? Are you interested in receiving such training? If it already exists, please post the information below because I want in, and I would love to share those resources with my friends and family. If it doesn't exist yet, are you interested in building it? I'm seeing a lot more people taking to social media to share their talents and teach one another, and even making a living while doing it. So our momentum here is building in the right direction. We need more aggregation and synthesis now. There must be education that can be rapidly applied in our lives that also comes with a network that engages and absorbs the learner, enabling them to quickly apply what is being taught through learning by doing, beginning at the personal level and providing opportunities to engage higher levels as their competency matures and expands. The aim is to maximize each individual's ability to better themselves quickly in multiple areas of their lives, and to provide them with access to whatever avenues are available for them to contribute their talents in helping others. As we educate ourselves and engage the challenges we are facing, we are going to be overwhelmed by their size and complexity. But we do have the means to simplify their complexity and shift our perception to reveal new solutions and ideas quickly and easily. Check this out.
And statistical graphics has become an art form of its very own, led by designers who are passionate about visualizing data.
This is the billion-pound-ogram. This image arose out of frustration with the reporting of billion-pound amounts in the media. 500 billion pounds for this war, 50 billion pounds for this oil spill. It doesn't kind of make sense. These numbers are too enormous to get your mind around. So I scraped all this data from various news sources and created this diagram. So the squares here are scaled according to the billion-pound amounts. When you see numbers visualized like this, you start to have a different kind of relationship with them. You can start to see patterns, you can see the scale of them. Here, in the corner, this little square, 37 billion, that was the cost, the predicted cost of the Iraq War in 2003. And as you can see, it's grown exponentially over the last few years, so the total cost now is around about 2,500 billion. It's funny, because when you visualize statistics like this, you understand them. And when you understand them, you can really start to put things into perspective.
Imagine seeing your local, state, and national budget presented like this. Wouldn't that be illuminating? I bet we would notice all sorts of interesting things, and that it would be much easier for us to identify where we can focus our attention for the greatest positive outcome. This chart is also very accessible. You could be the type whose eyes glaze over the moment you hear numbers and percentages, but you could still look at a chart like this and notice different relationships. I bet a casual 5-minute look over your state's budget presented in this manner would make you a much more informed citizen and voter than you would have been if you had only read what was published in your voter packet. And now multiply that improvement by your entire community having access to this information and discussing it with one another. Continuing with the idea that top-tier training will keep the casualty list short, we all need to be able to access the most dynamic and effective education programs ever devised. And these training and education programs must be able to produce functional understanding of any given subject quickly and reliably because, again, we have only a couple of years before either the climate or the globalists reach a point where it's beyond our ability to do anything about it. Give this a listen.
If you agree to cripple yourself so that you will never achieve mastery, you can pick up a very large core very, very quickly by rearranging through this trick of sort of 80-20ing, do 20% of the work, get 80% of the benefit, and almost no education is structured this way. But if you actually wanted to educate people like this, you could suddenly have an entire population of presumably learning disabled kids who could suddenly do so much more than they ever imagined, because it's everybody who plays the guitar, they have a lot of positive reinforcement. If you play the piano, you're doing scales and learning to read music in 2 different staffs for forever before you get to anything interesting. And so if you make the world look much more like the guitar, where 3 or 4 chords unlocks 85% of the music that you ever want to play, you can do that with anything. You can do it with language, you can do it with mathematics, you can do it with biology. We just don't teach that way. Every subject is much easier than the people who wish to make money teaching it would have you know. So for every single subject that can be systematized, there is a systematization that allows you to get 80% of the power with probably 5 or 10% of the effort. And so the key question is you have to prove that you have the superpower to rearrange the subject to disintermediate the people who get paid for teaching it, which will always push you towards mastery, which is a question of getting the last 2 or 3% out of the system. And so the good news is that you can rearrange any subject to learn most of it very, very quickly. The bad news is that it will feel terrible because you will be told you were doing the wrong thing and dooming yourself to a life of mediocrity as the jack of many trades, master of none. But in fact, the problem is that the jack of one trade is the connector of none.
80% of the power with 5% of the time and effort is precisely the sort of advantage we want. And this training needs to be multidisciplinary because, as Eric mentions, the master of one trade is the connector of none, and it's through our connections that we will increase our adaptability, maneuverability, and resilience. If I have no knowledge of something you've mastered, how will I be able to recognize the value of your contribution and understand how it will fit into the larger picture? It's in our mutual interest that more of us has a basic functional understanding of a broad range of disciplines, so we can connect and network with one another at ever broader and higher levels of excellence. Speaking of excellence, let's turn our attention to politics for a moment. Most of us want nothing to do with politics because it is so nasty. And I wouldn't be surprised to find out that its nastiness is by design, much like the thorns of a plant are meant to keep softer and less capable creatures from manipulating it, for better or for worse. But consider the following.
Now, I've used examples of the unequal treatment of, say, campaign finance or ethics cases in the past. I file these types of complaints all the time, and I'm building up very adequate case history, I think, of these examples. But you can do the same thing in other ways with other issues. Because listen, ultimately, we will need to basically replace the people who are in our judiciary, our bureaucracy, and in our political class who seem to think that they benefit from destroying the rule of law, your rights, and they basically are unconcerned about the damage that they're doing to us. However, this process is made far easier if you find the worst ones in your community, you document, and you clearly identify the problems, and then work to remove them. We are in the place that we find ourselves today because nobody bothered to do this over the past few decades. So let me close with just a few thoughts on very specific steps that you should start taking right now where you live to document the rule of law collapse in your community, and then hopefully provide some direction in how to get it back. You probably can't make a huge impact on the circus in DC or the clear corruption that we're witnessing on the national stage, but you certainly can start to fix things where you live. And here are some places I think you can start. Number one, just start tracking your local prosecutor's failure to press charges against criminals. You file a records request and then start tracking the crimes your sheriff or local police recommending prosecuted, and then the actual cases the prosecutor rejects and ignores. The data will tell you whether you have serious people who care about the rule of law and that key position of government. Number two, start researching your local judges. See if you can find just the worst one in your community. Get specific examples of times that they fail. Find out who is the worst. You start with one. And when you can start to expose their failings and failure as an honest judge, you can start to create an opening to replace them. Now finally, just start exposing corruption in local government and then documenting the conflict of interest, the failure to follow the law, or the abuse of the system by those in charge. And I'm sorry, but it is probably happening everywhere. But start where you live. The media used to do this. Most of the time today, though, they don't. However, in order to make this difference, we must first show up because, as always, the future belongs to those who show up.
Ultimately, these people have to be replaced, and doesn't that sound nice? But who will be their replacement? A lot of money has been spent on creating various foundations that are producing the next generation of leaders who have been groomed to serve the interests of those foundations and their political parties, their ideologies, and so on. Where is the citizens' version of this? I assume it should have been our schools, but that's not the case, is it? We need a curriculum that can help us transform from subjects to citizens. And then we need to do some serious housekeeping in removing these corrupt and compromised leaders from their positions and replace them with qualified citizens dedicated to the well-being of our communities. Here's an interesting clip from a presentation on why American generals in World War II were so successful.
And this takes me to the key point of what I'm going to talk about here. It has lost one essential element. That element was relief. Successful commanders were kept in place and promoted. Unsuccessful commanders were relieved and moved into other jobs. This was the way they ran not only the General Officer Corps, but really the entire Officer Corps in World War II. Without that factor, I think the Marshall template is somewhat crippled. If you don't punish failure, you cannot reward success because you're leaving failures in place. When you leave failures in place, you create an atmosphere, a culture of mediocrity in your entire officer corps. Rather than everybody driving to the top, people tend to drive toward the middle. If you're not punished for failure, then why take risk? Why seek success? Keep your head down. And the policy of rotation of officers that we've had from the late Korean War on, Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, just reinforces that tendency to drive to the middle. And what you get is an officer corps built for stalemate, not for victory.
I imagine some of us will be turned off by the use of the word punished, and so I think we can make some further refinements here. We should reward excellence. If I am not excelling in my role, I believe I should be replaced by someone who can do a better job. Where would I go then if I were relieved? Personally, I enjoy learning new things and serving in different capacities, and I prefer to not live out the rest of my life in a single role. Replacing me with someone more effective would be less of a threat to me if I had access to a rich network of opportunities where I can apply my skills and learn new ones. Should I one day come across something that I want to devote my life to perfecting, I guarantee you that there will be a fire in me that will allow me to hold that position for a very long time. It's that fire that allows for unmatched excellence and what we should focus on cultivating in ourselves and each other. Let's help one another prepare for and get into positions where we can apply our passions for our collective benefit. One more from Glenn.
One of the things I think that a lot of people on the freedom and liberty side of the equation that we have, and it's a common failing, not unusual, is that you come in and you just want to change the world tomorrow because I don't want to be involved in politics. I want to get back to my life, right? That's typically how most of us are. Most people are. And the reality is that if you care about freedom and liberty, you have to be eternally vigilant. And just because you have a great victory or you maybe make tremendous progress, that isn't the end of the game. You got to stay involved because there are always grifters. There are always people who want to take advantage of the power of the state and manipulate for financial or personal gain or the pursuit of power or utopian ideology, whatever it is. They're always going to be there. They're not going away. Even if you have a great political victory and you think that you've achieved this nirvana, they're always going to be there trying to take it away. And so you have to be engaged and involved at all times, generationally. You just have to stay engaged and involved.
There will always be people who seek power and will use the power of the state for their own interests, and so we will always need to be vigilant and pass our knowledge on to future generations. Like Glenn mentioned, I don't want to be dealing with politics either. I want to pursue my own interests, but I see how our political system has been able to go off the rails because too many of us are, like me, ignorant and not engaged. Can we do both? Can we pursue our own interests while engaging in the political process? Let's look at this example in Ron Finley.
I went to a grocery store in my neighborhood, and I'll never forget there was a tomato that says maybe coated with shellac. Shellac was the stuff we put on our wood in wood shop. And then I would go to other areas and see the difference. I'm like, okay, what's the difference? Why can't we have the same thing? And it just let me know that all of this was by design. And my whole thing was, okay, we need to change the design. And I thought to change it with my garden, start growing my own food. I originally got a citation once I put a garden out there. So for years, I just let it go. Trash, weeds, I didn't care. And I never got a citation. But as soon as I tried to beautify it, I got a warrant for my arrest. This time I'm like, I'm not taking it out. This is too positive of a thing. If you have a problem with it, why don't you try redesigning these communities where they uplift people rather than keep them down? And I figured it was time that this was changed because you didn't give a shit that this had trash and litter and dressers and toilets on it, but I beautify it and now you have a problem with it. So what does that tell me about your thinking about me and my neighborhood?
As we identify problems in our community and we begin to implement solutions, the political world is going to engage us. We are changing the design, and the design is going to push back. Let's continue.
If somebody writes a law, that means they can tear it up and get an eraser and rewrite it. A gardener, that's gangster. Being educated, that's gangster. Building your community, that's gangster to me. So these are the kind of message to me that these people need to hear.
Do you consider yourself to be an underdog?
No, that underdog? By no means. I'm super dog.
Well, you went up against like an institution.
But no, they went up against me.
That is the attitude that we need to have. And maybe you decide to collect rainwater for your garden and find out it's illegal for you to do that. You could join or lead a group of community members to get this legislation changed so you can now harvest rainwater for use on your property. Here's the last clip from Ron.
And my whole thing was just imagine if the neighbors had done it collectively. So now you're exchanging food. You created responsibility and you created relationships in a community.
When we come together as communities, we unlock new possibilities that were not available to us as individuals, and something extra is created. That something extra is what's known as an emergent property. And here's an illustration. When yellow and blue come together, green is the emergent property. Yellow is not green and blue is not green, but together they can create green. My printer can produce a limitless number of colorful images from the intelligent use of just these 4 colors. It's the intelligent application of the basics that can give us so much. This is the master key that opens all the doors. Our greatest limitation is our own ignorance and lack of vision. And here's a perfect example of this.
Rather have $10,000 cash, or, wait a minute, this 2 out-of-the-box Oreo cookies. Huh? Are you sure? Yes. That's $10,000 cash. You want the Oreo cookies? Are you sure? Yes. Okay.
This little boy isn't an idiot. He's ignorant. He knows what Oreo cookies are, but he doesn't understand what those 2 stacks of cash represent. He's ignorant of the potential that lies beyond the superficial presentation of all that paper. With $10,000, he could rent an entire arcade for himself and his friends with Oreos and pizza and prizes for all. But he doesn't have the knowledge or the experience to see it and make that choice. That little boy is all of us. We are all held back by our ignorance and our limited vision for what is possible with the resources that are right in front of us, the greatest amongst them being one another. Let's go back now to that permaculture flower diagram from earlier and behold the fat stacks of opportunity sitting right in front of us. Keep in mind that all of these arenas and levels are actually interpenetrating one another, and that we have practically infinite combinations to work with in generating robust ideas for self-improvement, community building, entrepreneurship, content creation, and so on. As an example, let's start at the personal level in the realm of security and play a little. This could be as simple as making it a point to not have our head buried in our phone so much when out in public and improving our situational awareness, or taking a self-defense class, or learning martial arts, or installing and maintaining a home security system, or improving outdoor lighting and so on. Expanding into the local level, this is knowing our neighbors, having each other's phone numbers in case of emergencies, and building relationships where a neighbor can collect our mail when we're out of town for several days. It may be forming a neighborhood watch, or making connections with our local police department to report what's going on in our community and hearing what our department is able to do about it. I am sure they're already aware of the problems, but their hands are probably tied. So how can we as neighbors and local citizens help them hold their superiors accountable and get the necessary changes made? Think of what Glenn mentioned earlier about finding the worst examples of DAs and judges and getting them replaced. Building a strong relationship with our local police can help us accomplish that, and having the community support will enable the police to do a better job for us as we identify the corrupt and ineffective players in local government and courthouses who are making it difficult, if not impossible, for our police to serve our communities. And our police force will also improve from this community engagement and support, so this is a great feedback loop that we can leverage in our favor. Consider pausing on this image as you brainstorm your ideas and explore how they connect throughout these different layers and arenas. And whenever doom and gloom sets in and you're depressed by seeing that everything is corrupt everywhere, reframe that as unfulfilled requests for something better to be brought into our world. How can these requests be fulfilled? Our entrepreneurial and creative spirits have never existed in a more target-rich environment than today. These layers of personal, local, and regional are going to be the primary focus for many of us most of the time, as this is where we spend most of our lives and have the greatest influence and awareness. But we're not limited to this. We can scale this up further. Very few of us will ever lead a business that is global in scale and footprint, or hold a position in public office that is tasked with national and international affairs. But each of us is more connected with our global community today than we may think. Through physical travel or virtual travel through the internet and social media, we are exchanging goods, services, and ideas with one another. Maybe you post a video or blog about what you did to overcome a physical challenge through diet, exercise, physical therapy, etc., and list the resources that helped you. Your contribution can lead to someone on the other side of the world getting themselves out of a similar situation. And now that both of you have been liberated from that physical impairment, we now have two people who can invest that reclaimed time and energy that was locked up in pain and suffering and reinvest it into good works that benefit your families and communities. The exchange may seem to be at the personal level, but the reach today is global. This video is about overcoming the tyrants of our time, which will require us to outperform them both personally and collectively. All of these different layers are nested together and feed back on one another. A well-developed person, just through the example of what they have become and the things that they do, can inspire others to rise to a higher level of being. People who give to others uplift and improve their communities, as we saw in the Ron Finley example. These stronger communities in turn make it more likely that the next generation of individuals will encounter the knowledge and resources they need to reach even greater heights, because they stand on the shoulders of giants. And this is how it works when we do it right. The stronger our foundation, which is each of us as individuals, the larger we can scale as we organize ourselves, and the further we can go into the future. And really, there is no limit to our evolution. As we access higher levels of being, these levels will have an influence all the way down and throughout. Likewise, from the locus of our own being, our own thoughts, actions, and character will have an influence all the way up and throughout all of this. There will always be opportunities to build, refine, and harmonize the various interactions taking place amongst all these different realms and levels of being. And so there will never not be a need for you. And each one of us, as our individual and collective evolution presents us with ever more complex and challenging situations and commensurate rewards. Now here's a useful idea we can add to our toolkit from Aubrey de Grey, a biomedical gerontologist treating the ill effects of aging. As you listen to him speak about his strategy for how to heal the human body, let's think about how a similar strategy can be used to repair and rejuvenate an aging and ailing civilization.
But the thing is, they are rejuvenation therapies, so they will be applied to people who are already alive, and indeed in middle age or older, at the time that the therapies are developed. They will be applied maybe to people who are 60 or 70, and they will rejuvenate those people so that they'll be biologically 40 maybe. Now that means that they won't be biologically 60 or 70 again for another 30 years. At that point, we're going to need better therapies that repair damage even more comprehensively. But the thing is, we've had 30 years to develop those therapies, which is a hell of a long time in any technology. So I think it's absolutely certain that we're going to be able to stay one step ahead of the problem, that we're going to be able to develop these therapies rapidly enough that, and improve them rapidly enough, that the level of damage never, however long we live, reaches a pathogenic amount. That's what I've called longevity escape velocity.
We've covered some very big picture stuff, and now we're going to bring it back down to more personal and communal levels as we near the end of this primer. In this life, we will continue to deal with challenges that will range from easy to very difficult to impossible. It will be useful for us to remember during our moments of sheer overwhelm and exhaustion that easy mode is always available to us, and we should never forget the power of simple little things done consistently. A couple years ago, I was going through a difficult situation that stirred up some powerful negative emotions in me, and I knew these emotions were going to be strong for several days as I worked through this situation. And so I went for a walk with the intention that I would make eye contact with, smile, and say hello to every person that I passed by. This exercise didn't change the situation I was dealing with, but I could see by people's faces that my actions had lifted their spirits, and seeing that lifted mine. And this activity turned my mindset to a more positive frequency, where more useful insights came to my mind as I walked and thought about my situation and greeted people. Here's an interesting idea from Howard Bloom that has to do with pulling people out of a personal hell.
We all cycle through about 7 major mood swings a day, we adults. It's more like 22 for kids, for adolescents, which means we go from heaven to hell and back again 7 times a day. If I can succeed in making Joan Jett a star so that her song, I Love Rock and Roll, appears on the radio, and you love that song, for 3.5 minutes, that song is going to yank you out of the misery of a personal hell. That is secular salvation.
The more beauty and awesomeness that we add to the world, the easier it becomes for more of us to all break free of a personal hell more often. Beautiful art, great music, meaningful actions, and inspiring words. These simple things can go a long way, and I love this notion of bringing something into the world with the thought that it will uplift someone else. If you have a talent for something, and teach it so that others develop that ability within themselves, you just multiplied your talent and your presence more than you will ever get to know in this life, as the impact of your gift will ripple throughout the generations to come. Some of us are talented beyond belief and are living incredible lives, while others of us believe that we have no real talent or sharing it all and are living in a state of isolation, atrophy, and despair. If you feel that you have no purpose, that you offer little to no value to anyone and should just keep to yourself, remember that easy mode always exists and that the simplest things can become big. Say you find content online that makes you feel better, a little more hopeful and inspired, and you invest some of your time in watching what uplifts you, diluting the negativity that's dominating your mind. And then you give back to the creators of that content by doing something as simple as clicking the like and subscribe buttons. As an investment, a thank you from you to them. It's simple and easy, but you are still participating in an exchange and contributing to a positive feedback mechanism. If you do this and other things that bring you to a better place, I hope you'll share the wisdom you gained with others because you are far from alone. We need you and the others to heal up and climb as high as you can, taking as many of us with you as possible. We're covering a lot of ground in this primer, and I hope your mind is presenting you with ideas that you feel inspired to share because we need your vision. The tyrants of our time are truly formidable. They are huge, complex, and they have access to incredible resources. They can only be overcome by our shared humanity setting off as many positive, self-reinforcing feedback mechanisms amongst one another as we can. Several times I've heard in the media that what's going on today is very complicated 4D chess and that we are in the endgame. So, here's a tip on how to win endgames from Grandmaster Anna Rudolph.
Well, the good thing about endgames is that you don't really have to know it until the end how you're gonna win. All you need to do is improve your position step by step, and sooner or later you will realize what you need to do. But first, let's accomplish our first mission, which is to put the pieces on the best possible squares.
And there it is. We improve our position step by step by putting our pieces on the best possible squares. We focus on the basics and make improvements where we can. And when we reach the limit of our abilities and begin to weaken and fumble, we dial it back and redirect our focus to simpler things. We revisit the fundamentals, turn on easy mode, and build up momentum to access new perspectives that will allow us to take another shot at breaking through that next barrier and expand our territory. That territory being access to greater awareness, greater abilities, and greater freedom from our tyrants. We are building more connections with one another, and as our talents and knowledge become more intelligently shared and circulated amongst ourselves, think 80% of the power with 5% of the effort. The things we are going to accomplish together will blow you away. It's going to feel something like the following account from Eric Whitaker, but much, much bigger. Check this out.
And I went to my first day in choir, and I sat down with the basses and sort of looked over my shoulder here to see what they were doing. They opened their scores, the conductor gave the downbeat, and boom, they launched into the Kyrie from the Requiem by Mozart. And my entire life I had seen in black and white, and suddenly everything was in shocking technicolor. The most transformative experience I've ever had in that single moment, hearing dissonance and harmony, and people singing, people together, this shared vision. And I felt for the first time in my life that I was part of something bigger than myself.
Feeling like you're part of something bigger than yourself. People together with a unified vision, harmony and dissonance. Life now in shocking technicolor. This is what it's going to be like for us more and more often. We're going to close with 2 more clips from Eric's TED Talk, and I highly recommend you check out the link below to watch the video in full. I believe it to be one of the greatest talks in the history of TED, and we're going to mine some of its gems for the conclusion of this primer. Pay attention to the faces of the audience members as you watch this next part. Here we go.
Well, a couple of years ago, a friend of mine emailed me a link, a YouTube link, and said, "You have got to see this." And it was this young woman who had posted a fan video to me singing the soprano line to a piece of mine called Sleep.
Hi, Mr. Eric Whitaker.
My name is Britland Lucy, and this is a video that I'd like to make for you. Here's me singing Sleep. If
I was thunderstruck. Britland was so innocent and so sweet, and her voice was so pure. Such an intimate video. And I had this idea, if I could get 50 people to all do this same thing, sing their part, soprano, alto, tenor, and bass, wherever they were in the world, post their videos to YouTube, we could cut it all together and create a virtual choir. And I sent out this call to singers, and I made free the download of the music to a piece that I'd written in the year 2000 called Lux Aurumque, which means light and gold. And lo and behold, people started uploading their videos. Now, I should say before that, what I did is I posted a conductor track of myself conducting, and it's in complete silence when I filmed it, because I was only hearing the music in my head, imagining the choir that would one day come to be. Afterwards, I played a piano track underneath so that the singers would have something to listen to. And then as the videos started to come in, this is Cheryl Ang from Singapore. And from the crowd emerged this young man, Scott Haynes, and he said, listen, this is the project I've been looking for my whole life. I'd like to be the person to edit this all together. I said, thank you, Scott. I'm so glad that you found me. And Scott aggregated all of the videos. He scrubbed the audio. He made sure that everything lined up. And then we posted this video to YouTube about 1.5 years ago. This is Lux Aurumque, sung by the virtual choir.
Also posted below is a link to the full piece on Eric's page. It is transcendent and well worth your time. But consider this. All of this came into being because of one heartfelt thank you. A single thank you, and the world sang. Let's look beyond the poetry of what I just said and into the reality of what happened. What are we witnessing here? We should never underestimate the power of appreciation and simple acts of kindness. Watch how the audience responds.
I'll stop it there in the interest of time. Thank you. No, thank you. Thank you. So there's more. There's more. Thank you so much. And I had the same reaction you did. I actually was moved to tears when I first saw it. I just couldn't believe how the poetry of all of it. These souls all on their own desert islands, sort of sending electronic messages in bottles to each other. And the video went viral. We had 1 million hits in the first month, and it got a lot of attention for it. And because of that, then a lot of singers started saying, all right, what's Virtual Choir 2.0?
Popular wisdom may have us believe that outrage is what really generates the clicks and the shares. I won't deny the power of outrage, but for those of you who can see beyond the Oreo cookies to choose something of much greater value and potential, we just witnessed a standing ovation in the middle of a talk. To receive a standing ovation at the end of a performance is wonderful, but in the middle, something very powerful is on display here, and we can use this power to perform glorious works if we exercise the wisdom to bring that power forward and wield it with intelligence. And now it's time for us to blast through a summary montage to bring this all together and give your mind something valuable to work with.
The doctors are compromised, the professors are compromised, the journalists are compromised, the politicians are compromised. About the only thing that isn't badly compromised are people with an independent source of sustenance, individuals in very small groups are about the only thing that is free.
We never get to the root causes of the illness. It is not profitable for pharmaceutical companies to do that.
Who, if anyone, has the juice to square up with a $55 billion company that treats disasters as the cost of doing business?
You think politics don't involve you until they directly involve you.
How do you measure profits and stock prices against the value of people's lives? Against clean air, clean water, and soil? Can politicians really take money from corporations and be expected to hold them accountable? And who is the government for, anyway?
I wish it wasn't up to us to have to do everything ourselves. Like, I mean, I just want to go back to like a normal life and do the stuff I want to do, like not just try to figure out how to like avoid this like chemical apocalypse right now.
The people that want to do this work are there. The resources on the planet are there. We have the potential as humanity to have the most spectacular healthcare system, so the vast majority of people can live a really healthy, long life.
I've been feeling that there's really not a place for me. The world has no use for me anymore. I'm just an old guy waiting, to cash in his chips. Everybody needs a purpose and a reason to feel like that they're contributing. You all gave me a new sense of purpose.
A suite of amplifying feedback mechanisms or self-reinforcing feedback loops or so-called positive feedbacks have engaged.
Paris as a team, let you do what you're naturally good at, let me do what I'm naturally good at. We're reducing the number of net vulnerabilities between the two of us.
And you combine all of that knowledge into one unit. That's what you get. When you go out into the field and you have a good boss and they're like, oh man, I wish we had this capability. It's like, well, fuck, we can do that.
That we start personally trying to get all those things, or some of them, or one of them, or whatever, in alignment in ourselves. And then we move out to the local level and try and make sure that we're meeting our needs all around this flower successfully at the local level. And then we go and look at the more regional level as well. I'll bet everybody in this room could probably stick their initials somewhere on here and we'd have this thing all filled up and all taken care of.
The best form of welfare for the troops is first-class training. I need to do everything I can to have these guys ready. This training is what they're relying on to keep them alive.
When you see numbers visualized like this, you start to have a different kind of relationship with them. You can start to see patterns, you can see the scale of them. It's funny because when you visualize statistics like this, you understand them.
Do 20% of the work, get 80% of the benefit, and almost no education is structured this way. But if you actually wanted to educate people like this, you could suddenly have an entire population who could suddenly do so much more than they ever imagined. Every subject is much easier than the people who wish to make money teaching it would have you know. So for every single subject that can be systematized, there is a systematization that allows you to get 80% of the power with probably 5 or 10% of the effort. The good news is that you can rearrange any subject to learn most of it very, very quickly.
Because listen, ultimately, we will need to basically replace the people who are in our judiciary, our bureaucracy, and in our political class, who seem to think that they benefit from destroying the rule of law, your rights, and they basically are unconcerned about the damage that they're doing to us. You probably can't make a huge impact on the circus in DC or the clear corruption that we're witnessing on the national stage, but you certainly can start to fix things where you live.
Successful commanders were kept in place and promoted. Unsuccessful commanders were relieved and moved into other jobs. If you don't punish failure, you cannot reward success because you're leaving failures in place. When you leave failures in place, you create an atmosphere, a culture of mediocrity. Rather than everybody driving to the top, people tend to drive toward the middle. And what you get is an officer corps built for stalemate, not for victory.
If you care about freedom and liberty, you have to be eternally vigilant. There are always grifters. There are always people who want to take advantage of the power of the state and manipulate for financial or personal gain or the pursuit of power or utopian ideology, whatever it is.
All of this was by design. And my whole thing was, okay, we need to change the design. Why don't you try redesigning these communities where they uplift people rather than keep them down? I'm super dog.
Well, you went up against like an institution.
But no, they went up against me. Just imagine if the neighbors had done it collectively. So now you're exchanging food. You created responsibility and you created relationships in a community.
We're going to be able to stay one step ahead of the problem. That we're going to be able to develop these therapies rapidly enough that, and improve them rapidly enough that the level of damage never, however long we live, reaches a pathogenic amount. That's what I've called longevity escape velocity.
We go from heaven to hell and back again 7 times a day. Her song, I Love Rock and Roll, appears on the radio, and you love that song. For 3.5 minutes, that song is going to yank you out of the misery of a personal hell. That is secular salvation.
You don't really have to know it until the end how you're going to win. All you need to do is improve your position step by step, and sooner or later you will realize what you need to do.
And my entire life I had seen in black and white, and suddenly everything was in shocking technicolor. The most transformative experience I've ever had in that single moment, hearing dissonance and harmony and people singing, people together, this shared vision. And I felt for the first time in my life that I was part of something bigger than myself.
It is up to us individuals in small groups with independent means of sustenance to save our institutions and our respective nations and cultures, for that matter. We need that top-tier training that will help us become more resilient, competent, supportive, and connected with one another so we can overcome what we are facing today. I made this video to help me organize and share the ideas I've encountered about our situation and what we can do about it together. As you saw from the clips, what was presented were not my ideas, but a small fraction of what we have collectively made available to one another. I hope that you can use this video to lead inspired conversations with the people in your life, deepening your connections with one another and strengthening your positions. Please share successes and failures, as knowledge of both will help us adapt and progress more efficiently. If you know where I and others like me can go to from here, where our talents can be further developed and applied in service to others, if that top-tier training in civics already exists, please reach out. Many of us just need an invitation because we're not sure where or how to get connected, or we lack the skills but have the desire to develop those skills and put them to use. Mentorship and a mission are all some of us need. I am excited to be part of this something greater that we are building together, and I will continue to share any progress and updates with you. More to come.